Well, Shabbat Shalom to all of our family and friends. Welcome back to Torah Talks. We've been out for a little bit, but we're back. This is Torah Talks with Tony and Bill. I'm Tony. This is Bill. I call him Papa B. We are going to have a little bit of discussion about this Parsha, but I want to kind of talk about how we've themed this Parsha because there's some thematic language that I think would be very helpful to our audience, and I want to kind of get there. This Parsha, one of the things that you call it is the Parsha of locking in cross-generational focus. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I want to go first and kind of talk about some of the things that we've learned from this book, right, from Vayechi. When I think of, before I just kind of call out these 8 of these things, when I think of Parsha Bereshit or Genesis, I think of one of the principles of hermeneutics, right? The law of first mention,
right,
which sets precedence for the rest of how we're going to encounter words and language, verbiage, and understanding. And I think this book is perfect for that because it helps to set precedence for how we're going to look at things beyond this point, which is really important because the Parsha that we're in right now is a segue into Parsha Shemot, where we're getting ready to deal with life in a whole different world, right? And I think one of the things that you talk about in this book, from chapter 35 to I think 50, you say that there's a pattern here of the end times, of the end of the age. I want to talk about that because one of the things that you named was preparing us to transition our focus from our personal, individualized relationships with the Creator to our national identity, destiny, and mission. Those are really, really important words, and we're going to get into it in a second. You said there were at least 8 things that you learned and you shared with us, and I want to just list these 8 things, then I want to go in and talk about this cross-generational blessing. Number 1, we learn whose world we live in, who's the author of creation, right? That was a very important message to us all. We still need to hang on to that as we go into the rest of the Torah.
Yeah, because it's not just who authored it, it's whose it still is.
Whose it still is.
It still belongs to him, and he's still watching over it, and he's still the one, ultimately one who's going to hold responsibility, take responsibility for it. That gives us a sense of confidence, a sense that we are here not panicking over the latest report of the news or the latest report of the scientist or the climatologist or the alienologist or any of the other people or the medical world that tells us what the next pandemic is going to be. We don't sit there and panic of that because we know whose world it is and who's responsible, who's taking the responsibility for watching over it.
I love that. One of the things that came out in our study was the passage was brought up about him watching over his word. I think in Isaiah, he watches over his word to perform it. And that should give us a comfort, that should give us a peace that regardless of what we're hearing and regardless of what narrative is being sold at the time, we don't have to involve ourselves or become fear mongers and start preaching that narrative because we know who still owns the world, who's managing the ecosystem, correct?
Right. Man did not create the world. And he cannot destroy the world because the actor who did create the world is preventing it and will prevent it.
I love that. The other thing is the Edenic model, right? You talk about a vision we should never unsee. Give me a little bit about what that means.
Well, by putting the Garden of Eden and the whole picture, the imagery of all the beauty, fruitfulness, and shalom of that garden at the very beginning of man's experience, he made it where we can never unsee it. Those who know the covenant, who have the covenant alive in them, have the words of the living one being, he's watching over them. At the very root of it is this heart cry for Eden, of this hunger to go back to that place. And so because we have seen Eden and we can't get it out of our collective memory, we want to bring souvenirs of that experience to pass out and share with the rest of the world. And that is our mission, to be able to share the souvenirs of the vision of Eden. And it comes also with the vision of the seventh-day Sabbath. The Sabbath being this place of ultimate fruitfulness and beauty and rest and joy and celebration and intimacy with our Creator. That we bring, like Eden, we bring that to bear upon the world. So yes, these are critical factors as far as what the book of Genesis is trying to teach us.
Absolutely. A couple of more, I'll give a few more of the things you talked about. How the Ra, Shakhat, and Hamas threaten the planet. And thus why we in Earth badly need Tikkun.
Yeah.
All right, you talked about that. I want you to talk a little bit about that as well, and then there's one other I want you to share some thought on.
Okay, but early in the story of Genesis, of course, this is we're talking about what we've learned, what Bereshit, Genesis has taught us this year, are awakened more powerfully in us than it ever had been before. And so we're talking about this issue of how Ra, Shakhat, and Hamas threaten the planet, and thus why we badly need Tikkun, or the fixing or the repair of the world. So that's the theme of what we're talking about. And some of us say, well, what do you mean by Ra, Shakhat, and Hamas? Those are Hebrew words. I don't know what that means. And so in English, the usual English translations from Genesis chapter 6, which is where this all comes from, would be evil. There's evil in the world. Every thought of and the intent of man's heart is only evil all the time. Ra is the Hebrew word, which means self-obsessed, self-possessed, self-focused, so independent of the Holy One and His creation that we go in every direction besides the one He wants us to go in. And that's Ra, that's evil. We think of it as moral evil, but morality goes with it. The issue is it's against God. So we have Ra as the first element. The second thing that is referenced in Genesis 6 is, and all flesh was corrupted, Shakhat. This is the second thing. All flesh was corrupted. And what does corruption mean? Corruption means that once you start down the road of Ra, once you start focusing on what you want and what you feel and what you think you want to have happen, then you begin to develop pathways. You begin to develop activities and behaviors that bring the darkness into the world again. Make it tohu vavohu, one little bit at a time. Instead of bringing Eden and the picture of the Shabbat into your world as souvenirs and sharing them with other people, you bring the darkness of the tohu vavohu abyss into the world. And so that's Shakhat. That's the idea of corruption of your ways and the ways of men. And so Ra, Shakhat, and the third thing is Hamas. And in English, it reads violence. And violence covered the earth. You read this in Genesis 6. And so this, when we're talking about things we learned from Genesis, this is the three factors. And these are the three factors of the cup that will be in the prostitute of Babylon in the latter days. In this process, this is our common experience. The world is filled with it. Ra, Shakhat, and Hamas. Hamas means not just violence, though. It means cruelty and the sense that I do not want to give grace to other people. I don't want to allow any level of goodwill toward people that I don't like. If I don't like them, I want them to be punished. I want them to go to jail. I want them to get killed. I want them to suffer sickness. I want them to have a curse on their house, a pox on their village. You know, that's what we really want, because that's Hamas. The worst things I could possibly do to them, they deserve it. I don't want to give them grace. So these are the three factors that threaten the planet, and that's what causes the world to badly need tikkun, badly need repair. And if we know this is what's going on, we realize this is no cakewalk.
Right.
This is no heavenly little rose garden we're walking through. We're here for a purpose.
Yes.
We're the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike saying, no Rosh, Hamas, comes into our world.
Which kind of leads me to the next one, which is why man was created, right? That was one of the other things that you brought out in our Parsha studies. Why man was created. There's something else that you talked about that I thought was really important for all this is really important, but that was really important for our understanding and for setting precedents for how we're going to navigate the rest of our studies, and that is the grace, wisdom, patience, and faithfulness of our Creator, the ecosystem manager, our covenant partner. I can't say enough about that because of who He is, and it doesn't. Trying to understand who we are and trying to be who we are without understanding who He is in all of this just doesn't mean much.
You're right.
But because we know that he he's been functioning in grace, wisdom, patience, and oh, what patience, right? When we look at the stories of Genesis, the narrative of Genesis, and the things that happen, even with the covenant people, we know that he was full of grace, and he was very patient, as he is with us today. So he was with them in that day. And we're going to see even more of that as we move closer and further into the end game. But I want you to talk a little bit about this thing we're calling grace, because we did deal with that a little bit in our understanding, maybe, or misunderstanding of grace only being if you would, a New Testament or Brit Hadashah concept. And we know that that's not true, but talk a little bit about grace in this situation.
Yeah, grace is introduced in the Torah. It's introduced in chapter 6 of Genesis, particularly, when it says that Noah found grace. And he was searching for it. He was a receptacle that was willing to receive it. And I think that's the thing. Grace goes to where will be received. It's like water rushes to the lowest point. Grace is there, but it only goes to the lowest ones who are ready to receive it. So Noah found grace because he was ready to receive it. And grace, hin in Hebrew, is a sense of favor and goodwill, a sense that I'm not holding you to a standard you can't live up to. To the contrary, I'm not holding you to a standard. I'm calling you out. I'm bringing you out of your prison, out of your chains, out of your Shakat, Hamas prison that you're in. I'm offering you freedom. This is the idea. And the Holy One's, that's who he is. If it weren't for that, the earth would not be here. We would not even, it would not have existed in Noah's time.
Right.
It would not have existed in Abraham's time. It would not have existed in Yitzhak or Yaakov's time. It would not have existed in David's time or Solomon's time. It would have been destroyed, because you see, if there was no grace, if grace was not the motivating factor of everything, why not just wipe the whole thing out? It's just full of Rosh Hashanah and Hamas.
That's right.
You see, so he has a plan as to how he's going to bring grace through a people.
Right.
Through a covenant, through a people. He's going to bring that grace to bear in this world in real time. He's going to bring heaven's goodwill toward men into the earth according to his schedule and his plan. So yes, that's the grace. It's been there since the beginning. Grace shows itself through wisdom, through faithfulness, through patience, and we realize he's a really good manager of this ecosystem. It's his world. And because it's his world, he's doing what's necessary to find the people who will receive grace, and he'll always give that to them.
I love that. The parsha of locking in cross-generational focus. So this is important to me because we're seeing some patriarchs that we've been allowed to spend some time with throughout our journeys through Bereshit. But those patriarchs are now leaving the scene, and we're moving on to the next chapter without those patriarchs being here. But they did something before they left the earth. And those things are very important to us because we're called to do those same things. In fact, one of the things that you say here is that we are under a mandate to communicate, instill, awaken, and nurture our children and our grandchildren. What does that look like in real time? What are we doing in terms of answering that cross-generational mandate?
That's one of the key factors that the book of Genesis introduces to us, by the way. And of course, especially towards the end, we begin to see this shifting of focus to cross-generational. It's always been there. We talked about the blessing of Yitzhak. Why was he going to bless those kids? Just to have them feel good? No, because he wanted to pass something on from generation to generation. So there's always been this kind of the sense of generation. Abraham, he blessed Yitzhak, and he gave gifts to the other sons. But this is the issue of, it's always been there, it's part of the covenant, but it's really coming to a head now because there's not going to be any more patriarchs. Yaakov is the last of the patriarchs according to the system. Now, Joseph is going to be something else. We'll talk about his messianic imagery, but later time comes. But Yaakov, with Yaakov's death, the patriarchal era is going to end. We're going to say goodbye to the patriarchal era. Why? Why do we have it? Because someone had to develop this issue of a personal relationship with God. Mankind, human beings, can have intimacy, interactions, communication, conversations with the living God, with this ecosystem manager we've been talking about, who controls the world, who has this grace and mercy that he wants to bestow, and the Edenic vision, and the vision of the Sabbath, and the rest, and the sweetness of that process. He is accessible to mankind, but that comes with personal involvement. What happens whenever those people that have that ability, that special gift to be able to communicate at that level, when they are no longer there? When they are going to be passing away, and we're going to have to deal with having a personal relationship that's not based so much upon individual encounter and special appearances that come out of nowhere and words that come spoken from heaven over us, like go out. And what happens whenever we're having to base it upon something we picked up from our forefathers? Whenever we have to carry this gift of life, this gift of eternal life, this gift beyond physical life, gift that is actually heaven's life force, came through our forefathers to us, transmitting that to our children, to our children's children, where they can then be awake to a relationship that does not depend upon God appeared to Abraham and said so and so. Right. Where we just have that life force speaking to us from within our own self. But we're now in this focus upon cross-generational impartation. And everything Yaakov is going to do, and then everything Yosef is going to do in this few chapters of Parsha Vayechi are going to be to impart that life force into thousands of descendants, of seed, that will have the same ability to communicate, not in the God encounter method necessarily, but in regard to being able to have that life force living within us, that as the remembrance of Eden and the remembrance of Shabbat, Sabbath, the first Sabbath, seventh day. And that life force will be what is carrying the nation and keeping the Rosh Hashanah and Hamas at bay in their life, in their world.
I'm going to touch on something sensitive.
Okay.
You can handle it. That's why I'm going to pick on you.
Okay.
We talk about this mandate, right, which obviously comes with an accountability. We talk about this mandate. You and I both have children and grandchildren.
Yes.
And we care what happens to our children and grandchildren. But there's even a bigger picture than just us caring about their safety and their lives and all that. Sometimes looking at our children and grandchildren, if you're not looking through the right lens, it can become discouraging.
Right.
Because there are times where it looks like they have assimilated into the culture of the world and that they've lost their sense of identity. And that they're not really embracing who they are. These patriarchs released these blessings, and those blessings were very prophetic to who these people are. Not only were they releasing blessings, but they were being transgenerational, and they were releasing something that they knew God would be watching.
Right.
I need to understand a little bit more about our accountability. The mandate comes with accountability. What is our responsibility to our grandchildren and our children? How do we, I don't see us pulling our children together and crossing our hands and putting our hands on their heads and saying certain things over them. What does that look like for us? What should we be doing in terms of partnering with the manager of the ecosystem to transition our children, or to make sure that transgenerational word or covenant stays with them? What do we do? What's our responsibility in that?
The covenant, as it is developing, and we'll go into more emphasis in the book of Exodus, then the book of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, as that covenant continues to develop, he's going to give us more specifics about how to inculcate that in an era that does not have God encounters, to the extent that Genesis 12 and Genesis 18 and Genesis 31 and then different things add. So he's going to be giving us that. And one of those things he's giving, and I'll give you a kind of a foretaste of that, is Leviticus 23. He's going to build this calendar of Moedim. And the idea is that by focusing our households and our communities joy and celebrations, and also its accountability factors, which is Yom Kippur is the ultimate day of accountability for the year, not for the ultimate, not for heaven and hell. I mean, this is for the year and our behavior with regard to the year. These dates on the calendar, these special appointments on the calendar, are designed to help us keep our children reminded who they are, and what covenant they're part of, and whose covenant it is, and whose they are. And yes, they can receive it at different levels at different times. Yes, they'll have good seasons and bad seasons. Some seasons they will seem like they are totally assimilated, but then one day they'll wake up and says, I think I'll do Passover this year. Had a great event this year, and this week, and my wife is on a Facebook group that's for people who make sourdough bread, who have a starter, have a sourdough bread. Right. It's just that, okay? It's just it's secular. It's just about people who like sourdough bread, and we like sourdough bread. I caught that, by the way.
You did.
We love sourdough. So she's on this. So somebody on the post says, I don't want any theological arguments. I just want to know what do you guys do if you follow this Passover rule that says you get unleavened bread, you take everything leavened out of the house. What do you do with your starter? What do you do with your whatever you call that thing starter? What do you do with it during the 7 days when the Bible seems to say, I'm not asking for theological arguments. I just want to know what you do, because I don't know. I think I want to do that this year. I just feel like I'm drawn to. I've never done it before.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm Jewish or what, but I just feel like I want to have a clean start. How do you do it? And so, of course, at first, though she said, I don't want theological arguments. I don't want to get into this issue. That's what you got. Mostly the first one is, well, you don't have to do that anymore. It's Old Testament stuff. It's all this is irrelevant.
Right.
Don't worry about that.
Right.
And then she said, well, that really wasn't what I asked you. That wasn't the issue that we're talking about. I know you want to give me all that. And so people begin to say, well, here's what we do at our house. Here's how we do it. And here's what's important to us about that. And people start saying, this is the best post I've ever read on this thing. I have never wanted to do this. I never thought about this, but something has stirred in my heart. I want next year.
Right.
Tell me when it is, because I want to set aside my starter. I want to set aside the 11 because I believe there's something is in this. Something powerful is in this. And I want to have a connection with God in some way that I didn't really understand through the physical things of a starter. Well, I'm just using that as an example.
Sure.
That was most of the post was, I think I'm going to try that this year, even though they weren't even Jewish or weren't even Hebrew or weren't even aware that was a requirement or a statement before. Now, the idea is you ask me how we can build this into our family, our children. How can we help transmit it? We have to give up the power to control their lives. All we can control is our house and what we celebrate and what we show them is important and how our faces look and how our tone of voice is when they're in our house for the Passover or they're in our house for the Sukkot or outside of this at the Sukkah in the Sukkah. Are we angry? Are we depressed? Are we wishing we could get back on our cell phones and get back on our internet feeds? Or are we having the time of our lives? Talking about our God and how wonderful this ecosystem manager is. What are we doing at Yom Kippur? Why are we fasting at Yom Kippur? Just so we can say we fasted, we met the rule? Or so that we can have this near-death encounter? I'm totally accountable to you. How do you want me to change my life this coming year? This is the way in which we show them by actions how to carry on this life force. And yes, initially they may say, that's kind of crazy, I don't understand it. But someday during their life, because the grace receptacle is there, it will begin to pop, and that's what we trust. Not what we can do, what God can do.
I'm going to speak to parents real quick, and then I'm going to leave something with you that I hope encourages you. Give up the power to control your children.
After they're, a certain age.
Give up the power to control your children. There's an element of pride that travels in our desire to control our adult children. God watches his word. You just need to hear this and set in it for a minute. God watches his word to perform it. He's watching that covenant. Your responsibility is to live it. to live it out in front of them, to continue to engage in God's plan, to stay with Him, to stay aligned with Him, to trust His leadership and trust His timing. Trust that He knows He's the best at managing this ecosystem. He knows what He's doing. That's why we follow His word. That's why we follow His wisdom, and that's why we surrender to His wisdom. But give up that power to control your children. All right, so just a little bit of a testimony, because something happened this year for me that I haven't seen all year. This time through is really impactful to me. I held a conference from my home because of the media, right? We could do that. I held a conference from my home. And in that conference, we talked about Shabbat, we talked about the mezuzah and how important it is to actually be a living mezuzah in our world, and how to how to participate in Tikkun Olam. So we talked about those things. And there were people that was attending that conference that were from different backgrounds, different communities, different backgrounds. And at the end of the conference, we said, if anyone wants a mezuzah to put on your doorpost, we're going to send it to you, right? You just tell us you want it, and we're going to send it. So we had people that sent emails saying, I want a mezuzah on my front door, or my front post and all that. So we sent those out. This year, mezuzahs went up. In Memphis, Tennessee, in Covington, in the little town of Newport, Arkansas, on a women's rehab ministry door, in Houston, Texas. I mean, what was so beautiful is, even with the limited knowledge they had, the beauty and the glory of the Lord that covers those type of topics and idioms and expressions captured those people's hearts to where they felt it was necessary to hang. And then they sent us pictures of them hanging the mezuzah on their doorposts. Is little things that we think doesn't matter and catch on, that's catching on. Those were just a few people that was in conference with me. Right. But this is happening all over the world, right? Which tells me that sometimes we get disappointed and discouraged because we don't see things happening as fast as we want them to happen. But if we'll just be consistent, here's the scripture I'll leave with, and then I'll let you leave and pray us out. Paul said this, and this is what I think we were doing in the conference. He says, my brethren, be steadfast and unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. For as much as you know, your labor is not in vain. Yeah. I would encourage you to follow that pattern of thought. And even when it doesn't seem like what you're doing is making a difference, remember He watches His word to perform it. Papa B is going to give the final word and prayer for your families. Please gather your families around. We haven't done this in a while, but I feel it necessary as we leave Bereshit and we enter into Shemot, Exodus. I want you to gather your families around. Even as he begins to close this out, pull your families close, because we're going to pray for your family as we move into the next chapter, the next book of this Torah Portia cycle.
Amen. Thank you, Tony. And thank you for doing what you said and getting your family as close as you can get them under the circumstances, and being close yourself, and listening, letting your ears be alert and open. We have finished now a 12-week program, the first 12 weeks of the Torah year. The Torah year began this year with October 7th, the Simchat Torah. And it was an awakening call, because that's the day of the great Hamas attack upon the outpost of Israel and the atrocities that were committed there. I don't want to get into political issues about that with you, but that was our wake-up call to this year is going to be pretty important. This year, everything is elevated. All the events that are going to take place mean more to you. Listen carefully, because this is really important, and hatred is going to come, and anti-Semitism and all the marches and all the negativity about the Israel viewpoint, the whole God's plan for mankind is now under a great attack. So that's within 12 weeks we've been involved in. We've been focusing upon reestablishing our connection with the divine individually, as one and on each other. We want to have that eternal life force of the Hayah, the life force within us, the heavenly life force, awakened on an individual basis. That's been our focus for these 12 weeks up until this week. And beginning of this week and into the next series of chapters of Torah, the book of Exodus as we know it, the book of Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all the way into the prophets, what we're going to find is the focus is not going to end with our personal relationship with God, our personal awakening that we have individually. Whether we go to heaven or whether we die, or go to hell when we die, or any of those issues are not going to be the issue. The issue is the construction, the building of a great nation, a great collective, where together, we work together, we co-labor as millions of little children, Dutch boys with their fingers in the dike against the Ra, Shikat, and Hamas. And together we leave an atmosphere, create an atmosphere where those things do not permeate, do not control. And there is a chance for the awakenings to take place in children, in grandchildren, but not just in our children and grandchildren, in the children and grandchildren of the world. In those who have no connection to it, but that have that eternal spark of life somewhere hidden down below. So now I hope you understand how important it is, what's happening. We're having this great shift. The issue, hope we have a strong personal relationship with the Creator of the universe. I hope it's living stronger and more powerful. You need it. You need to have this personal relationship with the Holy One. You need to have His covenant alive and operative in you and in your household and in your family. These mezuzahs are not just about an emblem to put on the door. Right. It says the Torah is the constitution of this house. And we live by the Torah. The power of the Holy One is in this Torah. Now, this is where we have been, and I hope that's very strong in you, because what's coming next is I'm going to build, the Holy One would say, my great nation, the one I promised Abraham I would build. We've been talking about individually to build the foundation for that great nation. But in Exodus, in the Egyptian captivity, the bondage, out of that bondage, He is going to raise up a great nation. Out of all the things that are happening in the world today, out of the climatology worries, and out of the alienology worries, and out of the scientific worries, and out of the pandemic worries, and out of all the political worries and anxieties, He is going to raise up a people. He's going to raise up families after families after families. He's going to raise up a great nation. And He is going to put it under the headship of Messiah. And He's going to let the Messianic reign bring the taste of Eden and the taste of Shabbat back to this world again. Now, if you understand what's happening, this shift means it's time to step up our game. It's time to be strengthened by the eternal life force within us. It was time to be strengthened by this Hayah, the eternal force of life that God put into mankind, that now is awakened and living and on earth as it is in heaven, is coming forth. Now that's why we turn to each other at the end of this book, at the end of all the Torah books of Torah, we say, Hazak, be strengthened. Hazak, Hazak, be strengthened, be strengthened. V'nit Hazek, and may we all be strengthened together. Father, our Holy One, Creator of the universe, all these who are listening to the sound of my voice, being touched by these words and this conversation, may there be this great awakening, that you are not just individuals seeking to have a relationship with the Creator of the universe, seeking to walk as best as you can and be as good a person as you can. You are called to be part of a great nation, founders, as it were, of a great nation in your generation. May that blessing be upon you. May the beauty and the majesty of this calling eclipse anything the world has to offer to you. Anything the media or the entertainment world tells you really want, or the advertising world tells you really need. May that be eclipsed by the beauty and the majesty and the goodness of the Creator's plan and His desire to see goodwill come to earth, goodwill come to man. May there be a blessing upon your house and a blessing upon all your spheres of influence. May there be a blessing arising within you and come out of you, and may you indeed do the things and the works of Abraham in you and in your seed. May all the families of the earth be blessed. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.